Zarin, a young alien explorer from the distant planet Vicora, stepped lightly on Earth's soft green soil. His mission was simple: gather information about Earth's life forms and bring it back to his people. He had been to many planets, but none were as strange as this one. The sky was blue, the air fresh, and the plants, well, they looked like nothing he had ever seen. He was cautious and curious, knowing his task would take weeks of careful observation. He walked through tall grasses, noting every flower, every tree, every small creature he could find. His technology could scan these things, but Zarin enjoyed seeing them up close. He loved the way Earth's creatures interacted with each other. The air smelled sweet, but something about it felt odd. He looked around, wondering if it was just the foreign atmosphere. Something about this place was calling him deeper into the forest. Suddenly, he heard it. A strange, rhythmic buzzing sound, like hundreds of tiny wings cutting through the air. Zarin froze, scanning the area around him. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a thick cloud of bees darting through the air. His curiosity piqued. Zarin quietly followed them, his boots silent on the ground. The bees flew with purpose, weaving through the trees with swift precision. Zarin watched, careful not to disturb them as they went deeper into the forest. After a few minutes of following the bees, Zarin found himself at the edge of a clearing. The sunlight broke through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. There in the center of the clearing, he saw something that confused him. A large bear, its fur matted and thick, was surrounded by a cloud of bees. The bear didn't seem afraid. Instead, it sat quietly, its big eyes half closed, as the bees swarmed around it. Zarin's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the bees drop small globs of honey at the bear's feet. The bear didn't attack. It didn't even move. It simply waited, as though accepting the gift the bees were offering. Zarin tilted his head in confusion. This wasn't what he had expected. Why would the bees offer honey to a predator, an animal that could easily destroy them? In his own culture, honey was a treasure, a rare commodity, never freely given away. And yet, here were these bees doing just that. Zarin felt a strange pull, as though the scene in front of him held a deeper meaning that he could not yet understand. The bear, still unmoving, seemed to be in some sort of trance. The bees, as if completing their ritual, flew away into the trees after leaving their honey offering. The bear slowly stood up, stretched, and lumbered away, leaving the honey behind. It was as if the whole event had been a normal part of the bear's routine, something that happened every day. Still confused, Zarin took a small step forward, deciding to investigate. He crouched beside the honey globs that the bear had left behind. The sweetness of it filled the air, and he couldn't help but reach out, brushing the sticky liquid with his fingers. The bees had left no trace of aggression, no sign of anger or fear. They had simply given. But why? Why were these bees sharing their precious honey with such dangerous creatures? As Zarin stood up to leave, he noticed something else strange. There was a rustling noise in the bushes behind him. He quickly turned around, his hand instinctively reaching for his communicator. He had learned to always be on guard, even in a world as peaceful as this one. But when he peered into the shadows, he saw no predator. Instead, there was a small, quiet movement, a single bee flying directly toward him. Zarin blinked in surprise. It landed on a nearby leaf, watching him. It was as if the bee was waiting for something. He backed away slowly, unsure of what to do. The bee remained where it was, not moving an inch. Then, Zarin noticed something unusual. The bee had dropped a small, round piece of honey at his feet. He stared at it for a long moment. Could it be? Was the bee offering him honey too? He bent down and picked it up carefully. It was just like the honey the bear had been given, sweet and golden. But why would the bee offer him this? He was an alien, a stranger to their world. It made no sense. Zarin stood there for a long time, holding the honey in his hand, wondering about the strange ritual he had just witnessed. What had he stumbled upon? The bees seemed to have their own set of rules, their own world of agreements and protection. It was clear that this forest wasn't just a random collection of plants and animals. There was something more here, something deeper. As he walked away, his mind raced with questions. What was the deal between the bees and the animals? Why did the bees offer honey to the bear and the other creatures? What was the purpose of this strange, quiet exchange? Zarin didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of his adventure on Earth. Zarin couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed in the clearing. His mind buzzed with questions. Why had the bees offered honey to the bear and the other creatures? What made Earth's life form so different from those he had encountered on other planets? Everything about this world felt strange, and the more he observed, the more he realized that there was a hidden balance here, one that he hadn't yet fully understood. The following day, Zarin returned to the forest, determined to learn more about the bees and their unusual trade. He made sure to stay hidden, using his camouflage technology to blend into the environment. His movements were slow and deliberate as he followed the bees' path, keeping a safe distance. It was no longer just about collecting information. It was about uncovering the mystery behind Earth's strange, unspoken rules. After a long walk, Zarin found himself near the hive once again. This time, he made sure to keep his distance. His scanners indicated that the hive was large, far bigger than he had initially expected. He watched as the bees flitted in and out, carrying tiny loads of honey, their wings beating in perfect unison. There was something almost hypnotic about the way they moved. Zarin couldn't help but marvel at the coordination, the precision of the bees' actions. As he observed, he noticed something else. There were no signs of fear. No other creatures seemed to threaten the hive, not even the predatory animals that roamed the area. Zarin's brow furrowed. How was it possible that these bees, small and fragile, could live so freely without being attacked by the many dangers that surrounded them? He waited for hours, watching closely. Finally, the answer came to him in a quiet moment. A fox approached the hive, cautiously sniffing the air. It was a sleek, reddish animal with sharp eyes and an even sharper hunger. Zarin held his breath, expecting the fox to attack the bees. Instead, the fox did something unexpected. It stepped forward slowly, its movements graceful and deliberate. Then it paused and lowered its head in a subtle gesture of respect. The bees responded by dropping a small golden orb of honey in front of the fox. The fox, in turn, nudged the offering with its nose, then turned and walked away without taking another step toward the hive. It was as if the fox had understood the unspoken rule. The offering was accepted, and no harm would come to the bees. Zarin was stunned. This wasn't just a random act. It was a ritual, a code of behavior that every creature seemed to follow. The bees were not just defending themselves, they were engaging in some kind of trade, a silent agreement with the animals of the forest. The honey, it seemed, was not just food. It was a symbol, a payment for protection. The forest was alive, with a kind of balance that Zarin had never encountered before. Feeling a deep sense of awe, Zarin made his way closer to the hive. He felt compelled to understand more, to learn the rules that governed this strange world. But as he approached, he noticed something unsettling. The bees were no longer alone. A dark shadow loomed over the clearing, its presence palpable. Zarin turned his head and saw a group of figures moving through the trees. Humans. They were dressed in the thick, heavy gear of hunters, their eyes scanning the forest for prey. Zarin's heart raced. He had heard of humans before. Primitive, unpredictable, and often destructive. He had come to study Earth, but this was different. These humans didn't belong here. They were here to harvest, to take. And from the looks of it, they had no respect for the delicate balance of nature that the bees had established. He knew he had to act fast. Zarin didn't care about the humans' weapons or their technology. What he cared about was the hive, the bees, the animals, the entire ecosystem that was at risk. If they disturbed the peace here, everything would fall apart. Without thinking, Zarin activated his cloaking device, becoming invisible to the hunters. He moved quickly, his feet barely making a sound as he navigated through the forest. Zarin reached the hive just in time. The humans were getting closer, their footsteps growing louder. He could hear them talking about capturing bees, taking their honey and selling it. Zarin's fists clenched. They didn't understand. They didn't know the importance of what they were about to destroy. As the humans drew nearer, Zarin made a quick decision. He tapped into his ship's communication system, sending a signal to the hive. Immediately, the bees responded, their wings buzzing in unison as they took to the air. Zarin couldn't help but feel a strange connection to them, as though the bees were responding to his call, recognizing him as an ally. They surrounded the humans, buzzing loudly, creating a wall of sound that disoriented them. The humans stopped in their tracks, confused and panicked. One of them raised his weapon, but before he could take aim, a swarm of bees descended on him, their tiny stingers making quick work of his defense. The other humans stumbled backward, their movements erratic as they swatted at the bees, trying to escape. Zarin knew this was just the beginning. The forest had awakened. The balance was in danger, and it would take everything he had to protect it. Zarin had never been so deep in the heart of Earth's wilderness, and the more he explored, the more the planet's mysteries unfolded before him. The attack by the bees had sent a powerful message to the humans. They had retreated, leaving the forest behind, but Zarin knew they would return, and next time they might be prepared. His mind raced with thoughts of how he could protect the bees and the delicate balance that had been established. But he knew there was one thing he still didn't understand: the true nature of the deal the bees had made with the creatures of the forest. The next day, he set out once again, determined to uncover the secret behind this ancient, silent trade. He walked deeper into the woods, past the clearing where the bees had made their offering to the bear. His feet moved with purpose as he followed the bees' flight path, the buzzing sound growing louder the further he went. The trees seemed to close in around him, but Zarin paid no mind. He was no longer just a visitor to this world. He was a part of it, whether he understood it or not. After a long journey, Zarin reached a secluded part of the forest where the trees grew taller and the air thickened with the scent of honey. The bees were everywhere now, filling the air in a whirlwind of motion. They moved in perfect unison, a living, breathing force that seemed to follow an invisible rhythm. Zarin stood still, his eyes fixed on the swarm as he tried to make sense of their behavior. There was something almost musical about the way they flew, like a well-rehearsed dance. And then, something extraordinary happened. A large stag, its antlers wide and imposing, entered the clearing. The bees didn't flinch. They didn't scatter or hide. Instead, they welcomed the stag with an almost regal reverence, parting to allow the creature to pass through. The stag walked slowly, its hooves making no sound on the soft earth, until it reached the center of the clearing. There, as if it had been expected, the bees began to circle around it. Zarin couldn't believe his eyes. He had seen animals take offerings from the bees, but this was something else entirely. The bees weren't just giving honey. They were honoring this stag, as though it were a king among creatures. Zarin felt a strange sense of awe as he watched the stag lower its head in response, accepting the bees' tribute. The creatures of the forest, it seemed, had their own form of diplomacy. They didn't fight for food or territory. They traded in a way that was unspoken but understood by all. Zarin couldn't resist. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the delicate balance he was witnessing. His scanners, however, remained silent. There were no indications of danger or hidden traps. This was real. The bees, the animals, and the forest itself were in a kind of harmony that Zarin had never seen before. As the stag finished its silent ceremony, it turned and slowly made its way out of the clearing, leaving behind a few scattered drops of honey on the ground. The bees did not follow. Instead, they simply returned to their hive, their wings beating in perfect synchrony. Zarin stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what he had just seen. It was then that he realized something crucial. The bees weren't just offering honey for protection, they were offering respect, and in return, they received the same. The forest was not a battleground. It was a place of mutual understanding where every creature knew its role in the grand design of things. The bees, though small, were the heart of the ecosystem. And everything, from the birds to the predators to the very trees themselves, depended on this silent, ancient code. Zarin stood there for what felt like an eternity, contemplating this new understanding. He knew that he couldn't just observe this world anymore. He had to protect it. He had to ensure that the balance wasn't disturbed, especially now that he understood how fragile it truly was. Suddenly, he heard a rustling behind him. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for his communicator. But as he glanced around, he realized that there was no immediate threat. Instead, it was a single bee that had approached him once more, its tiny wings buzzing in the quiet of the clearing. Zarin knelt down, watching the bee closely. It hovered in front of him, almost as if waiting for something. Slowly, Zarin extended his hand, offering a gesture of peace. The bee didn't hesitate. It landed gently on his palm, and for a moment Zarin felt a strange connection. The bee looked up at him with what could only be described as understanding. Then just as quickly as it had landed, it took flight and vanished into the sky. Zarin watched it disappear into the distance, feeling a deep sense of resolve settle over him. The bees had accepted him, not as an outsider, but as part of the greater whole. He wasn't just studying Earth anymore. He was learning its rules, and soon he would be ready to protect its most precious secrets. Zarin stood in the clearing, his mind racing with everything he had learned over the past few days. He had seen the bees' silent exchange with the creatures of the forest, and he had begun to understand the delicate balance that kept this world thriving. The bees were not just pollinators. They were guardians, diplomats, and silent protectors. Their honey was not simply a food source. It was a currency, a token of respect, and a bond between creatures. But despite all that he had witnessed, Zarin couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was coming. The humans who had attempted to harvest the honey were only the beginning. They would return, and when they did, they would bring a force that no swarm of bees or forest could defend against. Zarin had seen their technology, their weapons. The humans were resourceful, determined, and driven by greed. They had no respect for Earth's delicate balance. They would take, they would destroy, and they would leave only ruin in their wake. He couldn't let that happen. Not to the bees, not to the forest, and not to the beautiful, fragile world that had welcomed him. He spent the next few days preparing. His ship was equipped with advanced communication systems, but it was his knowledge of the forest and the bees' behavior that would make the difference. Zarin had seen what the bees could do when provoked, but he had also seen their power when they were respected. He needed to find a way to reach out to the creatures of the forest, to unite them in defense of the hive. The problem was, the creatures of Earth weren't used to being united. They were solitary by nature, independent, and wild. But Zarin had one thing the humans didn't: a deep understanding of the forest's language. He had observed, learned, and now he knew how to communicate with the bees. The time had come to put that knowledge to use. It wasn't long before his worst fears were realized. One morning, as he ventured deeper into the woods, he heard the unmistakable sound of human voices in the distance. He froze, his heart pounding. The humans had returned. This time they were better prepared. Zarin could see them through the trees, moving in a coordinated line. They wore heavy armor and carried advanced weapons. The forest seemed to grow quieter, as if holding its breath. Zarin knew that if the humans reached the hive, the bees would be helpless. They couldn't defend themselves against the sheer firepower of the humans' weapons. Zarin had no choice. He had to act. He darted through the trees, his movement swift and silent. His cloaking device kicked in, rendering him nearly invisible to the humans. He moved with purpose, reaching the edge of the clearing where the hive lay hidden. From here, he could see the humans advancing, unaware of the impending danger. Zarin knew that if the bees were to have a chance, he had to warn them first. He raised his hand and activated his communicator, sending a low-frequency signal directly to the hive. The bees responded almost immediately, their wings buzzing in, unison as they rose into the air. They had heard his call. They were ready. But just as the bees took flight, the humans spotted something. One of them, a tall figure with a heavy weapon slung over his shoulder, pointed toward the clearing. "There!" he shouted. "The hive's right there!" Zaren's heart skipped a beat. The humans had found it. He didn't waste another second. He charged forward, pushing past the trees and into the clearing. The bees were already circling the humans, their tiny bodies darting through the air with incredible speed. The humans raised their weapons, but Zaren was already on the move. He dove forward, tackling the nearest human to the ground and knocking the weapon from his grasp. The bees didn't hesitate. They swarmed the humans, stinging and buzzing with a fury that only those who had betrayed the forest's balance could understand. The humans screamed, their armor doing little to protect them from the relentless assault of the bees. Zaren stood tall, his eyes scanning the chaos. The bees were in control now. But even as the bees worked to drive the humans back, Zaren could see the danger wasn't over. The humans weren't retreating, they were regrouping. They had underestimated the bees, but they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Zaren's pulse quickened. He needed to end this before things escalated further, but he also needed more help. He needed the other creatures of the forest to stand with the bees. He looked toward the trees where the shadows shifted. He wasn't alone. Suddenly, a massive shape moved through the forest. It was the bear from before, the one that had been offered honey. It lumbered into the clearing, its large body moving with surprising grace. Behind it, a group of foxes, wolves, and even a large, sleek panther followed, their eyes focused on the humans. The animals were ready. Zaren had seen what the bees could do alone. But now, with the forest united, he knew the humans didn't stand a chance. The forest had awoken, and it would not be silenced. The battle in the clearing raged on, a clash of nature's fury and human technology. Zaren stood at the edge of the fight, watching as the bees and the forest's creatures fiercely defended the hive. The humans, despite their advanced weapons and armor, were no match for the coordinated assault from the creatures that had lived in harmony with the land for centuries. The bees were everywhere, swarming in clouds, their tiny bodies buzzing furiously, stinging with precision. The foxes and wolves, swift and agile, darted in and out of the fray, nipping at the humans' heels and distracting them. Even the mighty bear, its massive form charging through the clearing, joined the battle, its roar echoing through the trees. The panther, sleek and deadly, moved like a shadow, attacking from behind with lightning speed. But despite the overwhelming numbers and strength of the forest creatures, the humans were relentless. They fought back, using smoke grenades and electric pulses to disrupt the bees' attack. One of the mercenaries raised a large, terrifying gun that fired high-energy beams into the sky, scattering the bees temporarily. Zaren watched in horror as the bees retreated, their coordinated swarm faltering. "Zaren!" a voice cried out behind him. He turned to see a familiar face, one of the forest animals, a crow, perched on a nearby branch, calling to him urgently. "The forest cannot hold forever. You must decide. Protect the hive or stop the humans." Zaren felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The forest had already taken its stand. The bees and animals were fighting with everything they had. But the humans were not backing down. If the humans reached the hive, everything would be lost. The bees, the forest, the delicate balance, and it would all be gone in an instant. But if he kept pushing forward, he would risk everything else, his own life included. The crow's sharp beak turned toward the edge of the clearing where the humans were regrouping. "They are coming. The forest's judgment is clear. It is not the bees that must decide, but you, Zaren." Zaren's mind spun. The bees had already given everything to defend their home. They had shared their honey, their trust, and now, their wrath. The animals fought valiantly, but they too were growing weary. Zaren had no choice but to act. He had to choose, and quickly. He took a deep breath, making his decision. He couldn't let the humans destroy this sacred place. Not now, not ever. With renewed determination, Zaren sprinted into the heart of the clearing, dodging the chaos of the battle. He reached the hive just as the humans were about to advance, their weapons aimed at the swarm. Without hesitation, Zarin pressed a hidden button on his communicator. The device sent a silent pulse across the land, activating the defense mechanisms he had prepared, the ones no human had anticipated. The ground shook as ancient trees in the surrounding forest began to shift. Vines erupted from the earth, coiling around the human invaders with terrifying speed. The trees themselves seemed to awaken, their branches creaking as they reached down to trap the humans in place. The animals, too, responded to Zarin's call, charging with renewed strength. The bears, wolves, and panthers surrounded the humans, herding them toward the center of the clearing. The humans were trapped. The forest had passed its judgment. Zarin stood in the center of the chaos, his heart pounding as he watched the scene unfold. The humans struggled, trying to break free from the vines and animal barriers, but the forest was unrelenting. It had defended itself, its silent treaty with the bees and animals unbroken. The humans had overstepped, and now they would pay the price. But Zarin felt no triumph. As the forest's punishment settled over the humans, he couldn't help but feel a deep sadness, the violence, the destruction. It was all unnecessary. Earth had its own way of dealing with intruders, its own rules that had existed long before the humans arrived. But now, Zarin had learned what he feared most. Earth wasn't just a planet to be studied. It was a living entity with a mind and will of its own. The bees, though victorious in their defense, now circled Zarin. They hovered around him in a strange, almost ritualistic pattern, as if acknowledging his role in protecting the hive. The forest had responded to his call, but it had also tested him, demanding that he make a choice that would forever bind him to this world. The humans, now restrained and powerless, were left to face the consequences of their actions. Zarin could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that they had underestimated the power of Earth's creatures. But as the forest grew quiet once more, Zarin realized the true weight of his decision. The balance had been preserved, for now. But Earth's future, its peace and its protection, would always rely on the choices made by those who understood its rules. Zarin was no longer just a visitor to Earth. He was its guardian. And the bees, the animals, the very forest itself, they were all his responsibility now. The air around the hive was thick with tension, but it had finally settled into an eerie calm. The humans were gone, detained and surrounded by the creatures of the forest, their weapons confiscated and their spirits broken. The forest had made its judgment, and Zarin had played his part in protecting the delicate balance between nature and the intruders. But despite the victory, there was a quiet feeling of unease in Zarin's heart. He looked up at the massive hive, its intricate structure a testament to the bees' ancient wisdom. The golden sheen of honey shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting the peaceful order of the forest around it. Yet, beneath that calm, Zarin knew the true cost of the battle. Earth's creatures had made their stand, but there would always be others. Other invaders who wouldn't understand or respect the sacred agreement the bees had with the forest. Zarin's heart tightened. The threat wasn't gone. It would return. And when it did, the forest might not have the strength to defend itself again. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of bees swarming in the distance. Zarin turned toward the sound, his heart skipping a beat. It wasn't just the bees, it was something else. A strange golden glow filled the clearing. He took a step forward, unsure of what to expect, and found himself at the edge of a new discovery. The bees were circling a figure one Zarin had never seen before. It was massive, its wings so large that they seemed to catch the sunlight in a golden flash. A glowing aura surrounded it, and as it approached the hive, the bees parted in reverence. This wasn't just another bee. It was something different, something far more powerful. Zarin stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. The creature that stood before him was unlike anything he had imagined. It was a queen, but not just any queen. This one exuded an otherworldly energy, a presence that demanded respect. The bees had gathered around her, their tiny bodies vibrating in perfect harmony with the rhythm of her movements. The queen bee's eyes glowed softly, radiating an intelligence far beyond what Zarin had encountered in any species he had studied. As Zarin watched in awe, the queen bee turned toward him. Her gaze met his, and for a moment time seemed to slow. It was as though she was seeing him, truly seeing him, in a way that no other creature had ever done before. And then, without a word, the queen bee extended a single, glowing tendril from her body toward him. Zarin stood frozen, his heart racing. He had never felt anything like this before. The queen's presence was both beautiful and terrifying, a symbol of the immense power that Earth's creatures possessed. He felt a strange pull toward her, a sense of connection that transcended language and culture. It was as if the queen bee had chosen him, not as an outsider, but as someone who understood. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Zarin stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the glowing tendril. The moment his fingers made contact, a flood of sensations coursed through him. Images of the forest's history, of the bees' ancient connection to the land, of the delicate balance they had maintained for millennia. He saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the ebb and flow of life on Earth, and the deep unspoken bond between all living things. The queen's energy enveloped him, and for the first time Zarin felt truly connected to Earth. It was as though he had been woven into the very fabric of the planet itself, bound by a force older than any of the alien species he had encountered. He understood now. The bees, the forest, the animals, they were all part of a single living organism, and Earth itself was its beating heart. When Zarin pulled his hand back, the queen bee withdrew her tendril, the golden glow dimming. She looked at him once more, her gaze full of understanding, and then, as if to acknowledge his newfound role, she dropped a small amber-colored crystal at his feet. Zarin bent down, picking up the crystal. It was warm to the touch, pulsing with the same energy that had flooded his body. This was no ordinary gift. It was a symbol of trust, a token of the bee's gratitude. He could feel the weight of it, both physically and emotionally. It was more than just a crystal. It was a promise, a responsibility. The queen bee gave him one last, lingering glance before turning and disappearing back into the hive. The bees followed her, their wings fading into the distance, leaving Zarin alone with the crystal in his hand. For the first time, Zarin truly understood what it meant to be a part of this world. Earth wasn't just a planet to be studied or exploited. It was a living, breathing entity, and he had been chosen to protect it. The queen had seen something in him, a kindred spirit perhaps, or simply a soul that understood the fragility of life. Zarin looked at the crystal in his hand, feeling its power reverberating through him. It was more than just a gift. It was a responsibility. He had been given a piece of Earth's heart, and it was his to protect. Zarin stood alone in the clearing, the amber crystal warm in his palm, pulsing softly with energy. The forest was quiet now, its earlier chaos replaced by an eerie stillness. The humans were gone, their weapons and greed removed from the equation, and the bees had returned to their hive. The creatures of the forest had returned to their own lives, but something had changed. Earth was no longer just a strange, beautiful world he had come to study. It had become something deeper, something he could no longer leave behind. The queen's gift weighed heavily in his hand. It wasn't just a crystal. It was a living reminder of his promise to protect the fragile balance between the natural world and those who would exploit it. It was a symbol of Earth's trust in him. But now, with this responsibility came an overwhelming burden. He had chosen his path. There was no going back. Zarin looked out across the forest. The trees whispered in the wind. The animals moved through. The underbrush and the bees continued their work, flying in and out of the hive with the same meticulous grace they had always shown. But this time, Zarin saw the forest with new eyes. It wasn't just a collection of trees and animals. It was a living, breathing system, a delicate web of life that depended on each creature, every leaf, every drop of honey, and it needed him now more than ever. He glanced at the sky above, his thoughts turning to his ship and the rest of the Vakoran fleet. He could leave, return to his people, tell them about Earth's wonders and the lessons he had learned. He could bring them back, perhaps even make Earth an ally in the galaxy. But deep down, he knew that wouldn't be enough. The humans weren't the only threat to this planet. There were others out there, more powerful, more cunning, more dangerous, and they would come. Earth wasn't prepared for the dangers that lurked beyond its atmosphere. Zaren's thoughts were interrupted by a soft buzzing sound. He turned to see a small group of bees hovering near him, their wings shimmering in the dim light. They circled him, their tiny bodies vibrating in perfect harmony. Then, without a word, they dropped a piece of honey at his feet. He knelt down and picked it up, understanding immediately. The bees weren't just offering him food. They were offering their trust. It was a gesture of partnership, a recognition of his role as their protector. In that moment, Zaren knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave. Not now. Not after everything he had seen, everything he had learned. Earth needed him, not just as a visitor or a scholar, but as a guardian. The bees had chosen him, and so had the forest, the animals, and the very essence of Earth itself. Zaren stood up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose settle within him. He didn't need to return to his people. He didn't need the approval of the Vakoran fleet. Earth had become his home, and it was here that he would make his stand. The days passed, and Zaren's role as protector of the hive grew clearer. He spent his time strengthening the connection between the bees and the other creatures of the forest. He worked to reinforce the silent agreements that had existed for millennia, ensuring that no outsider would ever disrupt the balance again, and when other threats came, as Zaren knew they would, he would be ready. The humans were just the beginning. There were others, larger forces, who would test the strength of Earth's harmony. But Zaren had a new family now. The bees, the animals, the trees, and the very soil beneath his feet. They were all part of the same living organism, and Zaren was its protector. One evening, as Zaren sat beneath the canopy of trees, the amber crystal glowing softly in his hand, he felt the presence of something new, something more profound than anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just the energy from the crystal. It was the forest itself reaching out to him, connecting with him in a way he had never felt before. The world around him seemed to pulse with life, every leaf, every animal, every drop of honey part of a living, breathing whole. Zaren closed his eyes, feeling the heartbeat of Earth in his own chest. He was no longer just an alien on a distant planet. He was one with this world, its protector, its guardian. The bees had given him their trust. The forest had accepted him as its own. And now, with the crystal in his hand, Zaren knew that he would never leave. Earth was his home, and he would defend it with everything he had.